Well, hello everyone. This is Gregory Zelfand, and we're going to get going with how to improve SharePoint User Adoption webinar. All right, before we get started, just a couple of administrative announcements. First of all, I'm going to be showing you some demos today, and the demos are based off SharePoint Online. However, if you have SharePoint installed on premises, or if you have older version of SharePoint, that's still fine. Most of the functionality I will be showing you today still applies in your case as well. And most importantly, today's topic is kind of independent of the SharePoint version. Since we're going to be talking about SharePoint user adoption, it doesn't really matter whether your SharePoint is installed on premises or online. The same kind of fundamental concepts still apply. Also, I do have a slide deck which I'm displaying on the screen right now. I also have that slide deck for you to download. You can do so at any point during the next hour or so. If you go on the handouts section in your control panel, you should see the PDF document, and you can download it, like I said, at any point during this webinar. Now, if you're having technical issues, cannot download the document during the webinar, I do have the same slide deck posted on my SlideShare account, and I will share the link at the very end of the webinar. Also, we do have, this is a pretty full webinar, kind of a sold-out webinar, which is good, but everyone is muted because of the number of people that we have. With that being said, I do want to keep it informal. So if you have a question you want to ask me, just feel free to type it into the chat window, and I will be monitoring it throughout the webinar, and I will be more than happy to answer your question. Lastly, we will have, maybe 5-10 minutes at the very end. We'll kind of have the dedicated Q&A session, and also I will publish my email address at the end. If you have a question you want to ask me, offline, by all means, just send me an email. We'll be more than happy to respond to you. Okay. All right, just for those of you who have never attended my previous webinars or training sessions, let me formally introduce myself. My name is Gregory Zelfand. I'm an independent SharePoint consultant. Have been using the environment, have been using SharePoint for more than 10 years now. I absolutely love the application, absolutely love the platform. I am a huge advocate of SharePoint. I blog a lot about it on my own website, SharePointMaven.com. And one unique thing about me, kind of the way I differentiate myself, from my competition is that I do not utilize any third-party tools or web parts. I just exclusively utilize out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality when I provision sites for my clients. That means I don't use any third-party tools. I do not utilize any code or third-party web parts when I try to solve business problems for my clients. And as I mentioned, I own my own consulting company, SharePoint Maven. And what I do for a living, I help organizations migrate to SharePoint or SharePoint Online, of course, cloud these days. I consult on best practices, and I do lots and lots of training. And I will talk about training at the very end of this webinar. All right, so here's the agenda for today. We'll first kind of discuss the major reasons, the causes of poor user adoption. And then, of course, we'll spend majority of time on the second bullet point. We will talk about the 20 different techniques, how you can mitigate, how you can improve your user adoption of SharePoint within your organization. And as I stated, we'll have a 5 or 10 minutes at the very end towards any Q&A. And as I said already, feel free to interrupt me and just type your question into the chat window. We'll be more than happy to answer as we proceed with the webinar. All right, so I'm not going to read what you can read yourself on the slide, but I'm sure if you Google I hate SharePoint, you will get lots of results, and I'm sure at some point of your career you have heard some, if not most, of the sayings that appear on the slide. So why does SharePoint get such an attention? Or negative attention in this manner? Why SharePoint has been treated differently? And the thing with SharePoint, at least from my experience, and I worked for both large and small organizations, is that with SharePoint user adoption specifically, it's like marriage. I mean, initially, everyone is kind of super excited, and SharePoint is going to solve, all the business problems, and everyone in the organization is super excited and can't wait till SharePoint happens. And when SharePoint happens, this happens. Usually, unfortunately, the reality is most of the time, SharePoint, fails to some degree, and nobody wants to talk about it. It becomes the most hated platform. Nobody wants to mention, SharePoint by name, and you get, of course, I hate SharePoint crowd, and everyone tries to utilize, other tools that, pretty much go back to the tools they used before, or go to other tools that are available at their disposal. So what are the causes of poor user adoption? Why does this occur? And I decided to separate, you see this on the slide, I decided to separate kind of the causes into two major categories, and hopefully it makes sense. The first category is what I call kind of technology obstacles that slow you down. All right, so we're all used to certain, way of doing things in our career. We've been doing maybe something for, certain way for 15 years. And a good example is, we're organizing documents, for example, in folders on our network drives or Dropbox or whatever it is. And when we migrate to SharePoint, it's definitely a very different user experience. And in some cases, if you go from folders to metadata, that's a much, a bigger step. So it's definitely, certain things will slow you down. And in SharePoint, it's not Dropbox. The reality is SharePoint is not Dropbox. SharePoint is not another, network drive. It's not your, K or G or whatever the letter is in your organization network drive. It looks different, it acts different, and it's a major change in technology. It's also a change in business process. We are used to, once again, to certain ways of doing things, sending email attachments, and, file sharing in SharePoint works differently. You cannot really easily attach a file from SharePoint. You have to share it. And I'm just giving you a simple example, and obviously there are other examples, like workflows, etc. Long story short, the technology, the technologies, might definitely slow you down in this case. And that's what I call, that's why I try to summarize those bullet points under, kind of this bigger category, the technology category. The bottom piece is what I call human factors. This has nothing to do with technology. This has to do with SharePoint or any other tool. This has to do with people. And truth of the matter is, right, we all come from different educational backgrounds. We adapt to change differently. Some of us are more tech savvy, some are not. People have their personal egos, and company culture plays a huge role. Why did I separate this into two, kind of separate categories? The reality of the unfortunate reality is that there is really not much you can do about the bottom side of the equation. You cannot really, if you have poor SharePoint user adoption, there is not much you can do in terms of controlling these factors. You can do a lot. I mean, there are certain things you can maybe mitigate, but you can really, I guess, improve. Most ROI will come in this area where you can make certain improvements to assist with the user adoption. So just wanted to highlight that I think most of the techniques I'm going to show you today, they will revolve around kind of this top area. Maybe some of them will help us mitigate some of the factors, but the unfortunate reality is there is really not much you can do with company culture or personal egos, etc., etc. So just wanted to highlight that. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the actual techniques now, and I actually have separated those techniques into three. The 20 techniques you're going to see into three different areas. The first area is before implementation. So these are the techniques, the techniques you can implement even before you start implementing SharePoint. The second category is things you can do during implementation, during the actual implementation, and the last category, things you should be doing after you do the SharePoint implementation. Okay, so let's start with the first category, the techniques you can do before implementation, before you start rolling out SharePoint to your within your organization. So, and the first one is and I'm sure I'm not being original here, but the first technique is, I'm sure you have seen this before, get senior leadership buy-in. This is not so much relevant if you are a smaller organization. Obviously, this would be more relevant if you are a large organization. But truth of the matter is, you really need to have senior leadership, behind you. If you're part of a medium or larger size organization, if you really do not have senior leadership, buy-in, your SharePoint implementation will fail. Too many times I've seen scenarios where, there are some few, excited folks within the organization, but they're really the only ones who are excited about SharePoint. There is really no one, at the senior leadership who understands SharePoint, understands the advantages, et cetera, et cetera. So you really need, the truth of the matter is you really need senior leadership buy-in before implementing SharePoint. Okay. Let's proceed. Sorry, I was just looking at some questions that I got. So the second technique is, do the SharePoint demo first. What does this mean? Well, that means that and the reality is that most, you should not expect, your employees to know what SharePoint is. And that definitely should not be your assumption. The truth of the matter is, majority of your employees, especially if you're migrating from older version of SharePoint, that's one thing. But if you're migrating from network drives, file shares, and SharePoint Online and Office 365 is totally new, thing to you and your organization, the reality is, I would say 80–90% of your employees have never experienced SharePoint, have never used it, etc. And gathering requirements is kind of a waste of time. It's stupid, without your employees knowing about exactly what SharePoint is and what SharePoint can do. And when I talk about do the SharePoint demo first, obviously I'm not looking for you to, create, anything fancy, any actual sites, etc. But I would recommend that you do a quick demo and show them just the general capabilities of SharePoint. And right now, I'm showing you an example of what I built in my own environment. But this is an example of a typical intranet built in SharePoint. If they're using, for example, Dropbox or file shares, et cetera, I mean, obviously they wouldn't be familiar with the whole, sites concept. So when you do the demo to your employees, to your users, end users, or even senior, your executives and leadership, tell them what the SharePoint is all about. Tell them how it fits into Office 365 suite of products. Tell them how with SharePoint you would be able to have an intranet homepage that would be a landing page to the rest of your organization. Tell them how each department might get their own team site, with their own department site where they would be able to manage content. Use that opportunity, use that demo to show them how they would be able to organize documents in multiple document libraries or SharePoint lists, or how they will be able to embed videos, for example. Use that opportunity to show your employees how, instead of organizing documents by folders, they will be able to organize them using metadata. And this is a good opportunity to show off how their search experience will improve drastically once they do so. Use that opportunity to, and I apologize, I keep jumping around, but just want to show you all the different, types of sites that are capable, that you can build in SharePoint. But another great example, SharePoint project team sites. A lot of organizations are using SharePoint to manage projects. So show them how, instead of stuffing, files into folders, they will be able to have dedicated team sites for every project, and they will be able to manage documents, have a team calendar, manage tasks, tasks, synchronize them with MS Project, have a discussion, etc., etc. And I'm not even talking about all these other, functionalities available like version control, check in, check out, etc., etc. But the long story short, you do need to, don't expect your users to know all of this. As a matter of fact, most likely they will not. Demonstrate the capabilities, the high-level capabilities of SharePoint, to kind of steer up, encourage some discussions and requirements gathering. And you don't have to be fancy. Like I said, you don't need to. I obviously already have an environment built in with my SharePoint, Office 365 account, but it could be as easy as, building a quick mock-up. It could be as easy as just doing a quick lunch and learn and, going over some out-of-the-box sites. There are plenty of videos, webinars for you and your folks to attend. The bottom line is make sure you and obviously your end users are familiar with what SharePoint is and what it can do before you start gathering those requirements. Technique number 3 is, and I actually have a whole separate webinar, dedicated to this topic alone, but implement SharePoint in phases. And what that means is that you should never really, consider SharePoint migration as kind of a, a small project and, implement everything, the whole 25, whatever, 60 sites in one shot. You should never do that. If you do, it will fail. You really should implement in small phases, and I always encourage, make each phase maybe only 2 or 3 sites. Do not implement in increments larger than that, because at the end of the day, it's not about the sites, or technology. At the end of the day, it's all about user adoption. If you implement 60 sites and at once, if you migrate at once, you're not going to be, capable of listening to your users' feedback. If you implement in phases and do 2 or 3 sites in phases, and maybe phase 1 will be just a project team site and some department site, you will be able to listen to your users' feedback. You will be able to react to it quickly, and you will be able to make appropriate changes for your future phase, for your future sites. So definitely, and once again, I have a whole webinar dedicated to that. We had this webinar last month. And in case if you missed it, there is a video recording on my YouTube channel, so definitely feel free to check it out. Okay, and I see a couple of people asking a question about, and I think I just answered that, but I do have, like I said, I do have a dedicated webinar for this technique number 3, and at the end of the at the end of this webinar, I will share my contact information, so you will be able to go to my YouTube channel and essentially grab the video from there. You can also go to my blog, and I have a video embedded in my blog post as well. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Suzette. Right, that was the question. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, technique number 4: designate a project manager. And I think, having a project manager for any project, just makes sense, but especially SharePoint project. And the reason for that is because SharePoint migration, it's not like you're moving from, OneDrive to another. You are not migrating to Dropbox. SharePoint is a beast, all right? So there is a lot to manage, and especially the larger organization you are, the more this makes sense. But you do need someone who will lead, somebody who will manage the project. It's not just about hiring an outside consultant and thinking that SharePoint will be successful. No, you do need somebody internally to lead the project and lead the effort. Why? Because once again, it's not about just pressing a button and migrating your files or creating a site and leave it alone. You need to manage your users. You need to manage communication. You need to manage testing of sites. You need to manage training. So there are a lot of, you need to manage communication with the senior leadership. It's the whole project team, consultants, whoever. Long story short, you do need someone to really lead the effort and manage the effort. And especially this, like I said, makes even more sense if you are a large organization. All right. And this is, by the way, this technique number 4 is is really dear to my heart because my background is in project management, IT project management. I led lots of SharePoint projects, before as well. So, I do strongly feel about this particular technique. All right, so this does it for for the techniques, what we could do before implementation. Let's now focus on things we can do during implementation. All right, technique number 5, do not recreate structures from old SharePoint on network drive. A lot of times I get into this big arguments with my clients because sometimes they would approach me and say, what, we need to migrate our G drive or K drive, whatever it is, 50 gigs into a into a document library in SharePoint, and I always question them why. Because if you're thinking of using SharePoint as just another network drive, my recommendation is maybe you should go to Dropbox or something. Using SharePoint as a network drive is a terrible kind of overkill. As far as the functionality you will have. So once again, you are probably better off just keep using your network drive or using Dropbox functionality. I'm sure you have seen it during the previous time I've shown you this, but the way you manage content in SharePoint is not really in files and folders. You manage content at the site level. So if you are migrating, and that's now one of the biggest mistakes I see lots of organizations make, they just provision one site, just really one site in SharePoint. They maybe have a couple of 2 or 3 document libraries, and they stuff all the whatever 50, 60, 200 gigs of information into one site and 1 or 2 or 3 document libraries. That's not how you should do it. If once again you have to strongly reconsider your decision to move to SharePoint if you are doing that. The way you manage documents in SharePoint, you manage your content, your permissions at the site level. So you should really break apart your content. You should really do your homework and break apart your content into multiple sites, multiple repositories, document libraries. Figure out your permissions, before you hit that migrate button. All right, and that's what this is all about. And even if you're moving from an existing SharePoint environment, SharePoint Online changes literally daily. Yesterday there was a big announcement by Microsoft and all the improvements they're going to make to SharePoint this year, mostly to the user experience, user interface. So if you have SharePoint 2007, 2010, the way SharePoint 2013 or SharePoint Online works is completely different. You have lots of different functionalities that are available. So do not recreate the nightmare you currently have in your network drive. And most of the time, 80% of whatever you have is probably archived junk that should never be migrated in the first place. So, so once again, do your homework. Do not recreate the nightmare you currently have. Okay, let's keep moving. Sorry, I'm just reading some questions. And there are some specific questions some of you asked on some of the functionalities that I have shown you already. I will be more than happy to answer those questions at the very end, but for now I would like to focus primarily on the particular topic of the webinar. But great questions, keep coming. Thank you. All right, so technique number 6, lead by example. What do I mean by that? Well, look, if you are migrating to SharePoint and you want others to use it, maybe you are supposed to be the first one who is really using SharePoint. So what I'm trying to say is, look, if you are maybe a project manager or you are kind of a designated lead for phase 1, go ahead and create an actual project team site in your environment. And and I know it says SharePoint upgrade, but call it SharePoint migration project, and utilize the actual SharePoint site to manage all the content, to manage all the information, to manage everything related to your migration project right in SharePoint environment. And you will be setting up, I think, a really great example for your team. Not only that, your team, your SharePoint migration team, will get will be able to start using SharePoint just by participating in the project. So definitely, if you are thinking of migrating to SharePoint, try to manage your documents, try to show off some capabilities just by utilizing SharePoint as a tool that will help you perform that migration. There is a great task list that you can manage, and you can manage your tasks using MS Project. You can synchronize it, or you can just use a task list as is. The bottom line is, the message for this technique is that you should really be a good example, lead by example to the rest of your organization, and drive your users to SharePoint that way. The next technique number 7, communication, and SharePoint implementation, SharePoint migration is never a quick project. It usually involves lots of people. At the very least, you will deal with power users, end users, senior leadership. Maybe you will work with consultants. Long story short, make sure you do a proper job of communicating to all your project stakeholders. And this technique isn't really nothing that is specific to SharePoint. It's more of a obviously relevant to any type of project, but especially with SharePoint, there are just a lot of moving pieces, a lot of stakeholders involved. So make sure you do a good job with communication. The next one is identify power users, and this is really important. I mean, there is no way, if you're a project manager or a lead, on the project, there is no way you will be able to handle everything yourself. One of the best-known techniques to assist yourself, and your organization is to utilize so-called power users. Every organization has SharePoint power users, and these are usually the people who are much more tech-savvy than the rest of the organization. These are usually people who are more excited about SharePoint than the rest of the organization. These are the people who you want to rely on when you identify requirements for certain sites. These are the people who you will rely on when you need to do training, right? I mean, I don't think you are capable of doing training, all the training yourself. You don't have time to babysit every single person in every single department. So make sure you identify power users in each group, in each department, whatever. And these are usually the people who will have alleviated privileges, compared to the rest of the organization, the rest of the employees. And these power users will essentially, be your ambassadors within your organization, your SharePoint ambassadors, and later maybe they are going to be part of your governance team. But make sure, once again, if you're a large organization, don't think you can handle everything yourself. You do need a team. You do need a team of power users. So definitely enlist them to assist you with your implementation. And I mentioned, in the previous slide, that power users will be able to assist you with training. And talking about training, don't ignore it. All right. The message is, I published a blog post where I said it's a crime to ignore training, SharePoint training, and I'm pretty serious about it. SharePoint is not Dropbox. SharePoint is not your network drive. Let me just show you an example. This is my project team site. If I right-click on any given document, these are all the different commands. These are all the different things I can do with the document in SharePoint. I can open it in Word. I can open it in Word Online. I can download it. I can share it, delete it. I can look up version history. I can run a workflow on it. I can check it in, check it out. And these are just the document features. So I don't think it is valid to expect that the average user will know all this available functionalities. So the bottom line is, every time, and should be the rule, every time you provision a new site or you roll out new web parts, for whatever, a team or department, whoever it is, you must do training. If you ignore training, if you don't do any training, you will have all those people in the I hate SharePoint crowd, and you don't want that. And you don't need to be elaborate on training. I'm not talking about spending hours and hours training people and show them every single command available in SharePoint. center, focus your training around the particular site that you created. If you created for them, let's pretend we created a team site, a project site. Focus on everything your users, your end users, that is, would be able to do on that team site. How to upload documents, how to, upload and, tag documents in bulk. How to, and I'm just showing you, sorry, it's a little bit lagging behind. So I'm just showing you an example of, what the user experience will be when they upload a document if you do decide to use metadata. But your users need to be aware, what if you drag and drop multiple documents? How do I tag those? How would I manage my tasks? I mean, how can I integrate it with MS Project? Or I want to be notified when somebody, I don't know, drops a new event on the team calendar. How do I set up an alert? All right. How can I, do any of this? Export to Excel, connect to Outlook. Do not expect that the average user will know about all of this. You must, once again, focus your training. Do not show off every single button. You don't need to do that. But only focus your training on the specific sites, on the specific business process that you are rolling out. And as I mentioned before, just like with the demo, you don't need to enlist your people in 8-hour, full-day training classes. Simple lunch and learns, online seminars, even the free training, that I'm delivering. I will talk about that a little bit later. Use any of these methods, whatever works for you and your organization. But there are lots of different ways to train your folks and build this into your overall implementation process. All right, so let's keep going. All right, just looking at the time, I think we're good. All right, technique number 10, every site must have an owner. What does this mean? I mean by that, obviously a site owner. Many times I start, I work with clients, and when you go maybe to an existing SharePoint environment, and I look, into an existing sites that they have, and I go to some sites, and it looks like the last time, somebody touched those sites was, 5 years ago. You need to keep your content fresh on all the sites, but most importantly, do not roll out the sites that do not have a site owner. Somebody needs to own that. And by site owner, I don't mean somebody who will have admin privileges. By owner, I mean who will own the content, who will own the information on the site, who will manage, permissions, security, and, will be able to respond about the content on that particular site. If you're all in a department site, make sure you have a designated matrix in place and know who owns each site and sub-site. It's very easy, especially once you give control to your end users and and they start creating all these different sub-sites. It's very easy to just have a hierarchy of sub-sites, and most of them will not be used, etc., etc. So long story short, you do need to have a site owner for every site, and you need to be aware at any given point who that owner is. All right, technique number 11. Hopefully this is not a surprise, but build simple and intuitive sites. I cannot tell you, I'm all for simplicity, and I cannot tell you how much this drives me crazy. Sometimes I go to the site, a sub-site, and I'm like, what the hell has happened here? There are like 55 links on the side, 15 or 20 links on the top. It's a nightmare. All the web parts are kind of all over the place. There is no easy way for me to navigate and figure out what is what, who owns what. It doesn't make sense. Links are all over the place, and links change from site, to site. There is no easy way for me to go from one side to another. Don't do that. Okay, once again, I'm jumping around on some of my sites, but what I'm trying to show you is the consistent look and feel, consistent navigation, etc., etc. Long story short, please build simple sites. It's really easy to mess a SharePoint site. Yes, you can add 25 web parts to it, but do you really need to? Make sure, to stay as minimal as possible in terms of your navigation. Do not create links, to the sites you don't need. Make sure it's consistent, your navigation is consistent from site to site, and it's simple. And there are less, there are less places for people to click on, the better. So please keep that in mind. Another technique I want to talk about is build an easy feedback mechanism. And by that I mean, look, you're going to go live with your SharePoint site, or your intranet, and then make sure there is an easy way for people to provide feedback on the site, like how, what are the different improvements you would like people to see. And for example, a great place for you to store that feedback would be maybe somewhere on the home page. Now, I don't have an example right on this page, but I have an example on one of my other sites. And the easiest way you can do is you can just, and there is an out-of-the-box web part called discussion board. And you can pretty much add this web part to your homepage and allow your users to participate in discussion. And you can encourage that discussion. You can inquire for feedback, but some easy way for your people to pretty much start a threaded discussion and comment and provide their input. And there are many other ways to do that. You can also incorporate the regular SharePoint list and ask for people to go in and submit their ideas that way. There are many other ways for you to implement. You can even start an Office 365 group if you want. There are many ways for you to kind of implement that, but there are a couple of things you will achieve. First of all, you will obviously drive your people to SharePoint site. If they want to submit feedback on SharePoint, instead of email, they will go to SharePoint to submit their feedback. But second, and most important thing, it's a psychological thing. You're going to empower your employees. You're going to tell them, hey, we care about you, we care about your feedback and ideas, we want to hear from you. So we want to make sure this is really critical as far as the buy-in from the rest of the organization, and as far as successful user adoption. So do take advantage of that. This really doesn't cost anything to implement, and believe me, there is a big ROI for this technique alone. Technique number 13 is kind of related, to the ones I mentioned previously, but move your business to SharePoint. If you migrated to SharePoint, but you still send attachments, via email, or you still refer, your people to Dropbox or, your network drives, then you're doing something wrong. If you really are serious about migration to SharePoint, do not send any more attachments. Share a document. Share a document from within SharePoint. Okay, just click a share button, type in the address, and the user will get a link to the document. So be serious about it, because we're all humans, and we always choose the easiest kind of approach, and something we have been using forever and are used to. So if you give me the luxury of the capability to go back to my network drive, I most likely will. So make sure this does not occur. Move your business to SharePoint. Force your people to go to SharePoint sites, and once again, lead by example. Share files from SharePoint. Drive, send links to SharePoint sites, and drive your people to SharePoint sites that way. One of the questions I just got from Suzette: can you send documents with a permission group? Suzette, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I guess you can. There are ways you can set up permissions in SharePoint, and you can share individual folders and files. And you can specify individual, granular permissions if that's what you're asking. Once again, if I have a few minutes at the end, I will demonstrate how this is done. All right, technique number 14, build an easy navigation. I kind of talked about that. There are many techniques as far as navigation is concerned, but let me just go back to my home page. And let me just go to one of the other sites that I have, HR employee site. So typically, there are, kind of two main different types of navigation. There is the left-hand side navigation, quick launch, what's called quick launch in SharePoint, and there is a top-level navigation. And usually the idea behind top-level navigation is that it's going to be global, consistent from site to site. You probably have seen me. I go from one site to another, but my navigation stays consistent. My global navigation stays consistent. My left-hand side navigation adjusts to the web parts found on this particular site. So, it depends what kind of methodology you use. but the main focus here is consistency. Whatever you choose, however you choose to provision, make sure your navigation is consistent and you don't end up with, like I said, 55 links on the left-hand side. So here is global navigation or top link bar navigation. This is the quick launch. There is also, this is another technique, and this is called promoted links. And this allows you to highlight. And there is another web part. This is another out-of-the-box web part in SharePoint, and I have actually written a blog post on how to configure that. So feel free to check out my site. But this is another great technique if you want to highlight certain content. If you want people to to kind of highlight certain sites or web parts, you can libraries. Let's say you can do those icons, and and by clicking on those, people will be driven to whatever site or library you programmed it to link to. So this is another technique to utilize. Here's another example of the same technique. It's called, once again, promoted links, where instead of clicking new button or whatever, people pretty much can you highlight the people's attention by doing those nice looking icons. All right. But yeah, make sure build an easy navigation. Make sure to build consistent navigation, and make sure to not do 55 links on your site. All right, the next technique is do not turn every SharePoint and Office 365 feature. And sometimes I start working with the clients, and they pretty much enable every single little feature available in SharePoint. And my message to you is, don't do that. Only enable features that you absolutely need. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about some of this. This all the different functions that I can do kind of behind the scenes. This site settings of a given site, but also I'm talking about some library specific, for example, settings. And a good example would be, let me just go behind the scenes. I mean, this all the different things you can configure for a document library. You can enable versioning, you can enable check and checkouts, you can set up alerts, workflows, etc., etc. My message to you: only enable what you absolutely need. Do not, if you don't need check and checkout, well, do not enable that feature. If you don't need versioning, do not enable that feature. Workflows is another thing. In other words, try to stay as simple as possible. I mean, you can always enable those additional features, but at least initially, do not enable publishing features on a SharePoint site collection if you absolutely do not need them. Stay as simple as possible, at least initially, and introduce those changes slowly as you proceed, as your users become more comfortable with SharePoint and Office 365. The next technique is, spice it up with some branding, and I know there are going to be, according to Microsoft and the presentation they've done on the future of SharePoint yesterday, there will be some improvements in terms of branding, in terms of look and feel. I mean, at the moment, I will admit that, SharePoint sites, this is kind of the default look and feel you get. You have seen me kind of spice it up a little bit with some custom colors, and, I even have a background image, behind the scenes, and I've added some, slideshows, etc. But I will admit it that out of the box, the look and feel, the branding capabilities are kind of limited. But still, don't, maybe, try to deviate from this and build something that's really a little bit more exciting, that looks like this. Once again, in some cases, you might need, usually branding is one of the reasons, right? You might want to consider hiring a developer. But once again, I probably would not recommend you do that immediately. At the end of the day, it will help you. It will help you obviously with user adoption, etc. But I think you will get a much bigger ROI if you really put your money into the actual configuration and site architecture, taxonomy, metadata, etc., etc. All right. And the next technique is, I think it's pretty simple, but think like an end user. Many times when I work with clients, they really think about themselves more than they think about end users, and that's disappointing. At the end of the day, it's not about you. It's about end users. So if you think about this, if you go to Amazon, my favorite shopping site, I mean, there is a reason why I love shopping there. It's so simple. Why? Because Amazon did their homework and they built the super intuitive site with all this nice looking filters, and you can pretty much buy an item within few clicks. So same approach, same methodology should apply to SharePoint. Your users must love SharePoint to be able to use it. So think like an end user. Do not build a site around content owners. Build the sites around end users, and by that I mean pretty much all the techniques I already kind of listed before. Make sure you build proper navigation. Make sure you maybe configure a document library with easy to follow metadata, so your users don't have to scratch their heads and figure out which folder I need to go to find my documents. So everything is pretty much right at the fingertips with with views you create, with search, with proper metadata navigation, filters, etc., etc. So do think about like an end user. Think how they're going to use the site and build the site around those requirements. Okay, I think there is a question from Sander. Can I talk about the functionality related to external users versus internal users? Sander, if you don't mind, that's a great question. Remind me again, type your question again, specifically what you're looking for, and I will be more than happy to talk about that at the very end of today's webinar. All right. So this does it for techniques that we do during implementation. Let's now talk about a few things you can do after you implement. And the truth of the matter is that SharePoint implementation really never ends. So be ready to do a lot of hand-holding with SharePoint. I mean, a lot of organizations think, yeah, you know what, let's implement SharePoint. We're done in 2 months, and that's it. No. The reality is you need to do a lot of hand-holding. You really need to do a lot of babysitting. So be ready for that. That's why you really need those power users to be ambassadors within particular departments, etc. But be always on the hook for additional training. Like I said, there is additional functionality occurring in SharePoint almost daily. SharePoint changes all the time. Additional functionality is always there. As your users become more comfortable with SharePoint, they will desire additional functionality. How do I do this? How do I do that? Make sure to be on top of that, and make sure to be ready for that, and make sure you do a lot of hand-holding long after implementation. Like I said, it's a never-ending project. Technique number 19, I think it makes sense. Keep content fresh. It's just like going to a regular website, right? Sometimes you go to some of these websites, and the last time they have been updated was 1999. Make sure you keep your content fresh. Make sure you have a site owner, and make sure the content is relevant. If the site, is maybe an archival or something, just archive it. But keep the site, all the sites fresh content. Fresh announcements, fresh, list of events. If I make it to your intranet page and I don't see anything in announcements, I don't see anything in the calendar, something is wrong. So make sure to once again keep the content fresh, just like the technique you would use with any website out there. And the last technique is something I already mentioned. SharePoint implementation is not a project. It's an ongoing operation. It's a never-ending thing. Yes, you are going to migrate to SharePoint Online, for example, but your project does not end there. As I said, there is additional functionality, available, being added all the time. There are other tools. Forget about even SharePoint. There are other tools that you own as part of Office 365. The more your users will become comfortable with, all of them, the more they will request to use them. So it is. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at this, but SharePoint implementation is a never-ending project. That means do not dissolve your SharePoint project team once you implement SharePoint. At that point, let's say you do a successful implementation, whatever it takes you, at that point your team will be converted to a more of a governance team. You do need a governance team in place to keep a tab on all of the sites that your users and content your users generate. You need to keep a tab on permissions. I mean, the list goes on and on. So make sure you you take that into account. And I have one bonus technique for you. So I know I said 20, but I have a little, bonus technique for you, and that's technique number 21. And I'm really strong about it. Stop thinking of SharePoint as an IT thing. It's a business thing. And believe me, I come from IT background, but still I feel very strongly about this. A lot of organizations think that SharePoint implementation is an IT project. It's not. If you outsource your SharePoint implementation to your IT group, your implementation will fail, period. Okay? The truth of the matter is it's not really a technology project anymore. Especially if you're migrating to SharePoint Online. The technical piece, the IT piece has already been done for you by Microsoft. The SharePoint has been installed on Microsoft servers. It's there. You don't need to worry about that. What you need to worry about is user adoption and making SharePoint essentially user-friendly as possible. And yes, IT might be involved. I'm not trying to say that IT should not be involved. They absolutely should, because obviously there are still technical components for them to be aware about, like security and Active Directory sync and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the business. It's you who will define the requirements, who will drive the user adoption, who will be it's business who will be the site owners. So make sure your business is actively participates in all of the discussions, helps drive those requirements sessions. Once again, do not outsource this function exclusively to IT. All right, so with that being said, before I go to Q&A, just a couple of very brief announcements. As I mentioned in the beginning, I do offer different training options, and on the screen you see the 3 different types of training that I offer. The first 2 are completely free training sessions. There is no catch. It's completely free. They're 2-hour live sessions. So the first one you see is geared towards beginners. The second one is geared more towards site owners. You will be able to, if you go to my website, or you will be able to follow the links. This will bring straight to registration pages, and you can register yourself. You can register, your colleagues, etc. But once again, completely free training. Definitely feel free to take advantage of that. Now, with that being said, the sessions are usually popular. So I know, for example, the one for tomorrow and the one I have next week are completely full. So, but make sure I do have sessions scheduled up until October of this year. So feel free to, to register if you're interested. I also do offer more of intermediate courses. This is where I go into the concept of metadata and document management and search and information architecture. This is really geared towards more of advanced users. I run those on demand, once again, live 2-hour sessions. If you're interested, feel free to check out the link and email me if you would like to participate, if you would like to register. I also do offer a number of webinars. I do run webinars pretty much every month. Once again, I have webinars scheduled up until October, and on this slide you can see the webinars I offer at the moment, but I will be adding more to the list, so feel free to check out my website and register. Once again, they're completely free. And this is my contact information, so in case if you want to follow me on social media, if you want to connect with me, these are the links. If you want to email me, my email address appears over here. And this is kind of the official end of today's webinar, but at this point, I would like to see if there are any questions. So I'll check my panel. Okay. Let me see, I'm just trying to read some of the questions. Okay. Suzette, you're interested in my YouTube channel. If you go to my website, I don't think I have a link on this slide deck, but if you go to my website, I do have a link to my YouTube channel over there. So that's where by the way, the recording from today's session will appear, but this is where I have some other, videos posted as well. So definitely go to my website. Please go to my website and check it out. Okay, so let me see. I think I got another question. How would I set up SharePoint Online for site design for external users. Okay, so actually, it's funny enough you mentioned this, Sandra. I am writing a blog post. Actually, it's going to be a slide deck specifically around external sharing. But the way it works with external sharing is that depending on how you set it up, is that your users, you don't need a license. You don't need an Office 365 license to to give to your external users. The way it works is that you will pretty much share a site or a document or folder, whatever you decide to share, and your users will need to log in and authenticate using one of Microsoft's domain email addresses. For example, if I am an external consultant vendor and you want to share a site with me, you can send me an email to my Gmail account. And when I click on that link, for example, a site that you have shared with me, I will be prompted to log in. Now, obviously, I will not have credentials from your Office 365, environment, but as long as I have, a Hotmail account, Outlook account, Xbox.com account, any Microsoft domain account, I can use that to log it in. The only reason essentially, they do it this way is so you can track me down the road and disable me if you want to, disable external sharing. But the way external sharing, and once again, I know I'm just giving you a high-level summary, but as I said, I will publish a slide deck. I'm just finishing it up on my SlideShare, and I will post it there, and I will also post it on my blog as well. But external sharing is a little bit, cumbersome at the moment. I will admit that. So, however, once again, if properly set up, I think it can really do wonders. So thank you. Great question, Sandra, and hopefully I was able to answer that. Okay, so let's see. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left. So I would like to see if there are any last-minute questions from anyone. Looks like I think we're at the top of the hour, so I don't see any other questions. So, on this note, I would like to end the webinar. I really appreciate your attendance. Hopefully you found it useful, and as I mentioned, I will be posting the video from today's session on my YouTube channel. And thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for great questions, and good luck with your SharePoint implementation. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.